I need to turn it on? Ah, there we go. Well, I'm sorry I forgot last night. I'm glad I remembered tonight. It's good to have you here. It's good to have the Kearneys. They go to church on vacation. Isn't that something? Oh, my. I know a lot of people that skip on vacation. I never thought that was right, but anyway, we're glad you all came this evening, and it's good to be here together. I want to talk to you tonight about some of the reasons we don't get what we want and what we feel like we need from God. I think the Bible is clear. Sometimes we ask, according to James, we ask and receive not because we ask to consume it upon our own lust. When I was a little boy, my parents were teaching me about prayer and God answering prayer, and I took them at their word. They were usually in the habit of telling me the truth. So when we had family prayer that night, I was collecting baseball cards at that time. For a nickel, you could buy a pack of baseball cards, and it had a big old square of bubble gum in it and 5 cards. And I had spent a bunch of nickels on cards, and I had about 100. And I wanted more and more and more. And that night in family prayer, I said, "And Jesus, I'd like for you to give me a room full of baseball cards." Well, my mother, I'm sure, gulped when she heard her boy praying for a room full of baseball cards. But I remember she handled me so tactfully. She said, "Dan, if the Lord answered that prayer, which room would be full?" Now, we lived at that time in a 3-room apartment above a little mission that emptied right out on the sidewalk. Little mission at 3919 Eastern Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was a little storefront. If you packed it clear full, it wouldn't have been probably any bigger, or maybe not as big as just this center section of this church, just a little old storefront mission. It had a little lean-to on the back. It had 2 stories. And to get to our house, you went in this little door to the side and up these long stairs and in. And then there was a hallway, and there were 3 rooms that went off that. There was a little lean-to in the back that had a couple of Sunday school rooms in it. And my parents had started a little mission they called East End Chapel there. And God was helping them. And their boys were growing up in that wonderful atmosphere. It wasn't all wonderful. The little neighbor boy was teaching my brother to say the awfulest curse words you can think of and tell him, "Say it, it's fun," he said. My mother got shocked half to death by that. Better to be shocked by my prayer for a room full of baseball cards. But anyway, she said, "Which one of the rooms would you want the Lord to fill with baseball cards?" And I got to thinking about that, and I said, "Well, I guess we don't have enough rooms, do we?" And she said, "No, that probably wouldn't be good." "And then what would you do with a room full of baseball cards?" "That would be thousands and thousands of cards. You couldn't even look at them all in a long, long time. You wouldn't even know what you had." She was being really sweet to her young boy, wasn't she? She wasn't just blowing me out of the water and saying, "That's the dumbest prayer I ever heard." I wish I was always that thoughtful and sweet. And finally, she told me that we needed to take prayer seriously and trust God to do what needed to be done, but not ask Him for frivolous things. Well, that was a good lesson. I can't say that I've never asked God for frivolous things, but I can say that she got me started in the right direction. So James said, we ask and receive not because we ask to consume it upon our own lust. So that's one reason we don't get answers. But I think there are some others. And I think they may be embodied in the life, in the story of the life of a man who was a leper. Let's turn, if you will, to 2 Kings chapter 5, and let's read the story of Naaman. Naaman. Let me get this so it'll stay on, because I'll look down and it won't be there, and I'll be in a dither. Okay, 2 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captives out of the land of Israel, a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. Isn't that profound faith? That little girl had seen a prophet who lived reality until, even when she was in horrible circumstances, she was basically a slave to Naaman's wife, but she had faith in her God. He would recover him of his leprosy. Verse 4, and one went and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is out of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. I don't have time tonight to go into how much plunder that was, but it was a bunch. It was enough payment to impress the king. So he took all of that plunder. And in verse 6, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come to thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent unto the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariots, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, that thou mayest be clean. But, boy, there's some really big conjunctions here. But is always a contrasting conjunction. Up there it says he was honorable man of valor, but he was a leper. Here, Naaman's reaction is contrasted. Verse 11, But Naaman was wroth and went away and said, Behold, I thought he should surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all of the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? And the short answer is no. Right. Go on home and wash all you want, brother. You go in a dry leper and come out a wet leper. You can't just go wash in them. So he turned and went away in a rage, and his servant came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again, like unto the flesh of a child, and he was clean. When I was a little boy, my mother told me that story, and across the years, over and over, I've heard it, But some time ago I was reading in my devotions, and it suddenly grabbed me that here in this story we see some of the reasons that our prayers don't get answered the way we would like for them to. The first of the reasons that I see here is very simple. He went to the wrong place. That's right. He'd gone to every doctor in the land of Syria, and he was still a leper. And then he gets all of this plunder together, these king impressing amounts of gold and silver and clothing and everything. And he goes to the king. And the king knows, and everybody knows, that the king cannot heal him. He went to the wrong source. Now, if this church were full of unsaved people tonight, I would say to them, part of the reason you're not satisfied in your heart is because you go to the wrong source. Now, I tell you that because you are going to bump into friends and relatives and neighbors and people of your acquaintance, and they're going to tell you their woes and their hurts and their heartaches and their heartbreaks, and I hope you listen to them. I hope you give them a shoulder to cry on. I hope you care enough to be God's outpost there where you live and work and fellowship and whatever you do. And somewhere in that, you need to ask the Lord to help you be able to say to them, let me tell you why you're not being satisfied. You're going to the wrong places. You go out on Friday night and spend your hard-earned money on a, quote, good time. And when your good time is done, you are drunk. You don't have any money left. You may get stopped by the cops on the way home and may lose your driver's license so you can't drive to work. You may wake up in bed with somebody you don't even know and wonder what kind of a sexually transmitted disease you've got. And you call that fun. When you get done with your fun, your problem is worse than it was before. Now, I didn't think up that. I had a man who went to my church that didn't even profess to be a Christian. He worked at General Motors, and he went back to work after a weekend. His name was Drake, and a fella walked in. He said, hey, Drake, man, I had a great weekend. What'd you do? He said, I mowed the grass, and I helped my wife with a couple of projects, and we went to the store and went out to eat on Saturday night. He laughed. He said, Drake, you're an old man before your time. Man, he said, I had a ball this weekend. And this fellow that wasn't even a Christian looked at him and said, you had a ball, huh? How much money did you spend? You got enough to pay your bills this month? Got drunk, didn't you? Oh, yeah, man, we partied till the place closed. Yeah, you were drunk, did a bunch of stupid stuff. Probably woke up in bed with some woman you didn't even know. Now you don't know but what you got some kind of a sexually transmitted disease that'll be with you the rest of your life. Did you get stopped on the way home? You remember you've already been stopped twice. The next time you lose your driving privileges. Did you get stopped? And the guy said, oh, shut up, Drake. You take all the joy out of everything. Well, he wasn't a saint himself, but he sure had a good answer for that fellow, didn't he? People go to all kinds of dead-end streets and empty alleys and places that will never give them what their heart yearns for and longs for. And tonight, I think we all know here, I hope we all know here, that the only place of real satisfaction is at the end of that long road that you walk when you start saying yes to Jesus. And you get out there until he has all of you and all you have and all your dreams and all your hopes and all your ambitions. Not till you get there are you going to find real rest and peace within. But oh, friend, I want to tell you tonight, at that point, there is rest for the soul. It's no longer me, it's him. It's not my life, it's his life. It's not my plans, it's his. I'm not trying to gin up anything. I'm not trying to accomplish anything. I'm simply trying to find and do his will. And in the midst of all of the storms of life, there's a wonderful calming peace in the middle of the storm. People don't get what they want because they go to the wrong place. But you know what? If we're not careful, even those of us who call ourselves well-saved and sanctified Christians can go to the wrong place. You know, we can think that, well, in church we got to have excitement. We got to have high pressure. We've got to have a little shouting. We've got to have this. I know of a church. I know well about that church. Friends and relatives and loved ones of mine went there. And everything was about having a good service. That preacher's wife would shout her hair down if she had to jump half the night to do it. They had shouting in every service. The preacher would greet you at the door. Hey, how you doing? Good to have you. But when he walked on this platform, his demeanor changed. And he came up and he'd come to the pulpit and say, are you glad to be in church tonight? We're looking for God's presence and the glory to roll in this place. We don't believe in quiet, dead services. And buddy, they were off to the camp town races. But you know what that church struggled with? That church struggled with emotional burnout. Because you can only live on those high horses so long. And somewhere along the road, it dribbles out. The Lord intended for life to be some high peaks of encouragement and then some valley walks of learning and establishing and settling. And you just make up your mind. You're going to serve God if it's on Hallelujah Mountaintop, but you're also going to serve God when it doesn't feel good and it isn't easy and nothing is going right and everything is going wrong, because you know that sooner or later he's going to lead you back up out of the valley and he'll take you to the high places again. You got to learn that. Or you go looking in the wrong place. You'll look at artificially generated emotion. I was listening to Jimmy Swaggart one time before he took his long plunge. And he said, oh, friend, he said, music is so important in our ministry. He said, I would say that music is probably 75% of our ministry. Well, that's interesting. I love music. I've spent my life involved in music. My kids sing. I sang with my brothers. I started singing with my dad when I had to stand on a box to see over the pulpit desk well. We sang in the car. We sang at home. We all learned to play all kinds of different instruments. Across the years, many times, Sunday night ended with everybody in my house. I'd get my guitar out, and another one would get a guitar out, and my girls would get their violins out. If Grandpa Kane was there, he'd get his harmonica out, and buddy, we'd have us a Sunday night hoedown. Paul'd play the piano, and we'd have us a time. But you know, when everything is said and done, music has a wonderful place. But it's actually a support role to the preaching of the Word. And the preaching of the Word is profoundly important. It's profoundly important to the preacher whose job it is to find out what God wants preached and preach the whole counsel of God. And if he does that, he's going to step on your toes and my toes somewhere along the line. That's how we move our feet. Otherwise, we get locked in place and don't go anywhere. But God confronts us and nudges us and challenges us and convicts us and may even embarrass us at times. But the whole object is to get us moving spiritually. It's easy to go to the wrong place. It's easy to go to the wrong place. You know, when Naaman had leprosy, it cut him off from his family. It cut him off from those that he was accustomed to leading. It doomed him. But there was a solution. He just had to go to the right place. The right place. I would point out to you that the right place was the country they just whipped. The right place was a man who treated him like he was nobody instead of somebody. The right place was a river he called muddy. But it's when he got to the right place that he found what his heart needed. Found what his heart needed. Second thing I see here is that sometimes we don't get what we want and think we need because of our personal expectations. You see it glaring in this story. He comes with his entourage. Everything about his entourage says, look at me. I am important. He has soldiers with him. He has animals carrying all of this plunder that he's bringing. I mean, people are bound to be saying, I wonder what's under those canvases. Look at how fancy the coverings are. He comes and he has his own set of expectations. Let's look at those expectations again. Look at what he had to say. So he went and he says he says in verse 11, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on, he didn't say call on the name of my God, but call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. Isn't that amazing? He already had it all made up what was going to happen. You know, when I was a little boy, I quickly learned that however you think it's going to be, that's probably not the way it will be. I honestly remember as a kid thinking, every time I get my hopes up and I think it's going to be this way or that way, then I get there and it's not. And then the times when I don't have any expectation, it is so cool. So I remember deliberately trying to shut out any thoughts and keep my mind blank so it would be so cool. But you know, whatever you like to think about it, all of us have expectations. I don't know how it was with you when you sought God, but when I got saved, I figured I ought to know it. And I'd heard a lot of people tell wonderful stories about how when they prayed through and got saved, they shouted around the place, they jumped up and praised God, and the trees looked greener and the sky looked bluer and the mud even looked better. I remember one preacher saying, I went out, he said, I was a farmer and I walked out after I got saved and even the mud looked better. Boy, that sounds pretty good to me. Anybody here would be offended at that? I mean, if you go out and the trees look better and the sky looks better and the grass looks greener and even the mud looks better, well, how could you argue with that? So when I'm seeking the Lord as a 17-year-old, I at least want to know. I believe I can know. I want to know. And I figure that the knowing will have something to do with some kind of an emotional something or other. And I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. I can remember, I was just back this last weekend to God's Bible School, where I was when I got saved. I grew up there. I could take you nearly to the place in the altar. They've changed it. The altar's now movable. But I could take you at least to the general location where I knelt over on this side of that curved altar. And I prayed and prayed and prayed. Oh, there were a lot of funny things that happened. There was a guy that I didn't have a speck of confidence in. I thought he was just a blowhard. I didn't have any confidence in him. And I was at the altar praying to get saved and heard a little commotion in front of me. And suddenly my pastor, the pastor of the church that we attended, rooted in front of this guy. The guy that had been praying there prayed to the top of his lungs. And when he prayed, he spit. He spit. And here I was trying to pray, and he's spitting all over me. He's just going on, you know, and My mother, you have to know my mother, she was a precious person. But she went and got our pastor and she said, that's my boy up there trying to get saved and he doesn't have a bit of confidence in that man. I want you to go up and get between him and that guy. And so here comes the pastor and he just rooted right in front of that guy. But you know, that wasn't a bad thing. That would have been a hindrance to me. And I prayed and I prayed. And I prayed. And people would say, oh, brother, get your head up. Get your head up. And I'd get my head up. Get your hands up. So I find my hands up. Pray out loud. Tell God. I'm thinking, oh, man. Do I have to tell God everything? So everybody can hear? So I started confessing to God. I was desperate. I got so aggravated after that. People came up to me and said, you know, I heard you praying the other night. I can't believe you ever struggled with that. And I want to turn around and say, shut up. You probably do too. I wasn't very spiritual yet, you know, so I was just wanting to put them in their place. But here I was struggling and struggling. I was there about 2 hours. Nobody does that anymore. I haven't been any place where anybody struggled anywhere near that long. And I'm not putting a premium on struggling. My whole point is I didn't have to struggle all that long. But what worries me now is we got people, when people haven't been at the altar, anytime at all, they get up there saying, have you confessed everything to God? If you have, you're on believing ground. Just take God at his word. You know, if he said it, he did. If he said he would do it, and you've done what you said, then he's done it, and you can't disbelieve him. You've got to take it by faith. You know what? That's not giving God a chance to work in a person's heart. I don't believe in that stuff. That's cheap Baptist style conversion. And very often it's about a mile wide and an inch deep. Gets a lot of people professing a whole lot of things that haven't really settled issues. But you know, that night I was at the end of my rope. And I'll never forget a man who was a businessman. A man who was a businessman who had invested in missions, because this was a missions convention and he was there. And he was a supporter of Brother Flexen. And he got, his name was Trent. That was his last name. And he got up there and he said, let me talk to you just a minute. He said, what are you looking for? And I said, I just want to know. I've gone to the altar before and I last about 2 days or 2 weeks at best, and then I'm back and I just want to know that I've really been saved. He said, well, listen. And he began to tell me the promises of God. And he said, you know, I think what you need to do is just drive a stake right here. And you tell God, now, Lord, I've confessed everything I know. But if you bring anything else to my mind, I'll confess that to you too. Because, Lord, I'm done with the sin business. I'm going out of the sin business. And he said, you know what? The Lord will take you on credit. I've never forgotten that. And then he said something else. He said, what if you were in court and the judge confronted you with the charge and you pled guilty? And the judge said, you know what? Since this is your first offense, we're going to forgive you. But don't come back here again, or you'll pick up this old charge and the new one. You know what had happened to me the week before? I'd got my first speeding ticket. And I'd gone to court. I went into that big courtroom, had about 350 people there. It was ugly. It was all painted black like a lot of modern churches had those can lights. I think it was designed to intimidate. I don't know why they do it. But up in the front, there were bright lights. On the place where the judge sat, over here was the prosecutor. Over here was a place for the defense. And they were calling people up. They started with the A's. Man, they were giving people days in jail. They were giving them big fines. They were getting them right and left. I'm sitting there listening, and my eyes are getting big. And I'm thinking, oh, no. My name starts with S, so they come down through the A's, B's, C's, O, P, Q, R, and they get to the S's, and they call off our names. And you go up there, and you stand, and there are about 6 of you up there at a time, and you stand before that microphone. And the judge looks at the prosecutor, and he says, all right, sir, what's the charge? And he reads the charge. And the judge had on half glasses that sat down on his nose like that, and he looked like he was born mean. And he'd look over those glasses at people and say, I've seen you in here before, and I don't want to ever see you here again. So since you didn't learn anything the last time, I'm going to let you have it this time. And boy, he would. He was a grouchy old soul. And he got to me. And they said, state your name for the record. And I couldn't even get my mouth to work. I had to try to get some juice up there so I could talk. And I said my name. Turned to the prosecutor and said, all right, what's the charge? And the prosecutor's looking at the papers, and he's shuffling and shuffling. He said, Your Honor, I guess we're going to have to drop this charge. He said, there's no speed on this ticket. Well, I distinctly remember that police officer coming back up and going over the ticket with me. He said, you were going 46 in a 35. And he said, now, if you'd have been just 2 or 3 miles slower, I wouldn't have stopped you. But because you were there, I'm going to give you a ticket. Oh, he said, I forgot to put your speed on. Well, let me write it on yours. 46 and a 35. He got done trying to scare this young boy who had just started driving, and he went back to his vehicle and forgot to put the speed on his ticket. So now I'm sitting in court, and the prosecutor says, Your Honor, I guess we'll have to drop this. And that mean judge looked at me over his glasses, and he said, do you have a speed on your ticket? And without even thinking, I said, yes, sir. Mine says 46 and a 35. He looked at me, and for the first time all day, he grinned. He said, were you aware that you didn't have to tell me that? I said, no, sir. Man, I could have taken the Fifth Amendment. I don't have to answer any questions that are going to incriminate me. But I didn't know anything, and so I said, 46 and a 35. He looked at the guy and said, any prior? He said, no, sir. He said, well, son, this is your lucky day. He said, I'm going to drop the charges, and I'm going to waiver the court costs. Son, don't you come back. If you do, you're going to come back and pick this up and your new charge. And I was saying, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. I wasn't a dumb kid. I knew you treat them with respect, especially if they're mean as him. Yes, sir. And I said, yes, sir, after he got done with that, and I just stood there. He said, well, go get your license. You're forgiven. That had happened on Thursday before I was at the altar on Saturday night. And this dear man is saying, you know, if you were in court and the judge said you were forgiven and pardoned, what would you do? And I started to cry, and I looked up at him and I said, I'd go get my driver's license. And he looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I hadn't. I went home that night, and I told my mother, I said, I don't know for sure how a fellow's supposed to feel when he got saved, but I told her what had happened. And I said, I just hope that was God having mercy on me to help me to know that I was right with him. And she said, son, I believe it was. I believe it was. I went to bed that night, and I had an alarm that went off early in the morning, and it started grinding before it started ringing. And I woke up the next morning when it started grinding. And I remember the first thought that came through my mind was, if I'm going to be a Christian, I've got to take time to pray and read God's word. And I threw back the covers, And I got on my knees beside that bed in the upstairs bedroom of 1800 Josephine Street. And I started telling God all over again how sorry I was and how I didn't ever want to live like that again. And you know what? He came real near, and I knew he'd forgiven me. I struggled for 2 hours looking for a feeling. But what I needed to do was make sure that I'd met all of God's conditions and trust him with this caveat. Lord, if you show me anything I haven't seen yet, I'll take care of that too, because I'm going this way. I've prayed a lot of times in my life wanting God to do things. May I tell you, you like stories? Will you let me tell you another one? I'd heard all my life about God answering prayer. Oh, I could keep your ear all night. My parents worked at God's Bible School. They didn't pay you enough to pay attention. I mean, there was time after time. The time my mother was washing clothes for a family of, let's see, at that time it would have been 5 kids and a mom and dad, and the youngest sister hadn't been born yet. She was washing clothes on a board in the bathtub. And she just got fed up. And she was kneeling there in the bathtub, washing those clothes on that old scrub board. And she said, Lord, I'll do this as long as you want. But Lord, I can't do this forever. My hands won't take it. She already had the beginnings of arthritis. And she said, Lord, I don't have any regrets about serving you, but Lord, I need a new washing machine, and I want a nice one. I want a name brand nice one. And the next day, the man called and said he had a washing machine that he had to get out of an apartment because people had one and they didn't want his there. He said, it's only been in there a little over a year. Could you possibly use a good Speed Queen? And she screamed in his ear. So I grew up on that kind of stuff. And a speaker came to our chapel talking about the Bahamas. I already had a job lined up. I heard one of those guys at the homecoming this last week say that in 1969, the minimum wage was $1.10 an hour. I had a summer job where I made $3.69 an hour. That was a good job. So I'd worked that job 2 summers, and I'd worked that job, 2 summers, and I was lined up for my 3rd one. And this guy came to chapel talking about the Bahamas, and I felt like I ought to go. I mean, it just came on me. I felt like I ought to go. So after chapel, I went up and talked to him as Phil Newton. Probably none of you know him, but Phil had a funny smile when you know Phil Newton? When he grinned, his eyes disappeared. He scrunched his face all up. He grinned at me and he said, well, son, he said, we can't pay you anything. He said, we got plenty to eat and plenty of work, but we can't pay you anything. And I said, I owe my brother some money and I owe a school bill and I got to have some money to get back into school and got to pay the last couple payments on my car. He said, if God wants you, God will provide your need. So you just pray, and if God wants you there, we'll be looking for you. So I started praying. I really felt like that's what God wanted. I really did. And so I started praying. I went down and asked him if they would give my job to my dad. He had to find summer work because the school didn't pay through the summer. And they said, yes, they'd give it. So I'd given my job away. And I told my brother, I said, now, I feel like I should go down there, but I owe you this money, and I'm praying that God will help me. God will help me to get it. And he said, well, Dan, if you don't get it, you can just pay me later. And I thought, well, maybe that's God working. Maybe it's not. Maybe he's just feeling sorry for me. So I went in to see the president of the school, and I said, you know, I owe a school bill, and I had a good job, and I was planning on paying it off with that good job. I told him where I worked. School bought milk from that place. It was a dairy. And I said, but I feel like I ought to go to the Bahamas. And I said, I've asked them if they'll give the job to my dad, and they said they would. Oh, the president said, I've got just the job for you. I said, really? Yes, sir, you're just the man I need. At that time, I wanted to be Charles Atlas, and I'd go lift weights, and I'd pump iron, and I'd do lifts and pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups and everything else in the book. I was wanting to be Charles Atlas. He said, you look like a pretty stout fella, and I thought that was pretty good, He said, we're building rock walls. As I walked around on that campus this past weekend, I thought, there's my DNA all over those stones on those. It's all over those stones. I mean, you could probably go down all those walls on Young Street there, and my DNA would very likely be on 347. Because we would go out in the city where the city had torn down a house, and they had these big fascia stones. They were about this big and about this long and about that deep, and they had those all in the foundations, and they told the school they could have them if they would dig them out. You ever try to dig out fascia stones? Our equipment was a spud bar with a flat head. You know what a spud bar is? Great big, heavy, thick bar, and the point of it, instead of being pointed, it was flat. And so we had this big old spud bar, and we had a sledgehammer, and we had a pick. Those were our trophies of work. And so we'd get the 2-ton stake truck and take the side brackets off of it, and we'd throw those tool up on there, and we'd go to one of those places, and we'd start banging away. I went home one night, had 15 blisters on my right hand. That was the hardest job I ever had in my life. Took my T-shirt off one night, and I saw this black on my chest, and I thought, oh, that's that dirt going all the way through. And I got looking, no, I was black and blue. Those crazy rocks, you pick them up and lug them up against you. You dig them out. You lift them up on the truck. You drive back up to the school. You pull them off the truck and throw them on a pile. You go back and get more. Then the guy that was laying the stone would holler, I got to have those over here. So you go load them back on the truck and drive down there and get them off and lay them up on his rack. I mean, we touched those stones. We hugged them. But by the time I got done, my school bill was paid, my brother was paid off, my car was paid off. I had money to get back in school, and I had money to get to the Bahamas and take me through the summer. And I told my mom, I said, when I was praying, I thought people come up and shake my hand, have a little green in it, I'd get an envelope that was anonymous. Glad to see you wanting to go to the Bahamas. Here's a little money to help. I didn't get into that stuff. My expectations were over here, and God said, I'm going to let you be part Charles Atlas. I'm going to give you the hardest job you ever had in your life. But he answered my prayer. He answered my prayer. Very often, we think of God answering our prayers as being miraculous and doing things so we coast along on the easy street. But there are lots of times when that's not God's plan at all. He says, you step up and put your shoulder to the wheel, and when your strength is gone, I'll give you more grace. When you can't lift the load anymore, when you're crying out, Lord, save me, like Peter did, he'll be there. He'll answer your prayer, but it may not be like you thought it would be.
Right. So true.
So Naaman comes up. We're going to impress him. This old prophet will come out, and he'll call on the name of his God, and he'll strike his hand over the place, and he'll grab me by the head like Benny Hinn and shake me and push me down, and I'll be healed of leprosy.
Yes, sir.
No, the Lord doesn't have near as much style as Benny Hinn does. No, he sends his servant out and says, go tell that guy out there to go down to the river Jordan and dip 7 times. And when he comes up after the 7th time, he'll be healed. So the servant comes out, and he's wild. We know he's wild because he sneaks around and gets some of that stuff. You remember? He's really wild. He comes out and says, the master said, go down to the Jordan and dip 7 times, and you'll be healed. And I can almost see Naaman saying, did you hear that? That idiot wants me to go down to the muddy old Jordan River and dip in that slop hole water? Why? Those rivers in Damascus are cleaner and better. Why do I have to go there? Can I go to Damascus and dip and be healed? This is a joke. I thought at least he'd come out. Thought he'd call call on his God and strike his hand over the place. And he went away in a rage. But he had a servant who had a lot of courage, because when he's in that big a rage, he could just whip out his sword and cut his head off, and nobody'd say, "Why'd you do that?" The servant comes up and calls him Father. And he said, "Now, Father, if the prophet had asked you to do some big thing, wouldn't you have tried to do it?" "Why, of course. How much more when he just says, 'Go dip and be clean'?"
Yes, sir.
And slow the rage begins to seep away, and he thinks, "What do I have to lose? Got leprosy. It's going to kill me.
Yes, sir.
What do I have to lose? I've come all the way over here." And I see him dip and look and dip and look and dip and look, and the rage is coming back, and he dips, and his men are standing on the shore. "One more time, sir. One more time, Father. Don't quit. Don't quit. It's 7. And when he comes up that 7th time, his skin is as a baby's skin. And he comes storming up out of that water. I mean, he was a transformed man. I didn't read the rest of it. You read the rest of that story. He said, "I'll never worship any God but the God of the Hebrews. In fact, would you give me 2 mules' burden of earth? I want to make a place for me to worship God." And then he goes a step further. He says, "When I get back, my master's going to want to be on my arm when he goes into the temple to worship his God. But I hope God will understand I'm not worshiping that God. I'm going to this place that I'm going to fix to worship the God of heaven." He was a changed man.
Amen. Yes.
Because he found the right place, and he got past his misconceptions. You know what?
Yes.
I think there's so many areas in life. I'll just leave you out of it. Let me talk about myself. I look back, and there's so many areas where I thought God was going to do things one way. And I'm in there slugging it out, trying to get the job done according to my expectations. And I'm sure if I could have seen, God would have been saying, "Oh, Dan, that's not the way. That's not the way. No, back up. Do it my way. You can go to every other river in the world, but the only one that's going to get you whole is Muddy Jordan.
Yes, sir.
You can duck yourself all of 6 times or 5 times or whatever, but it's got to be 7. But you know, if you'll do what I told you,
Right.
I'll do what I promised.
Amen.
And friend, tonight, I'm not sure if I'm preaching to you or me tonight. Today's been one forevermore frustrating day. One forevermore frustrating day. My job drives me nuts sometimes. Did you know that? It takes approximately $10,000 a day to run Hope Sound Bible College. Where are you going to get that money? Well, most of the time, you know, I was raised in a home where you don't ask for anything. I mean, you get out and work. It's honorable to work. My dad wouldn't have taken welfare. We were poor and didn't know it growing up. We were completely welfare eligible. Mom and Dad never got any help for the babies. Mom and Dad never got any help for anything. They didn't get SSI for the kids that went to the doctor. They paid the bills. Daddy worked extra, and they did what they felt like they should. That's the way I was raised. And I look back across the last 25 years, and there's sometimes I beat my brains out trying to find something to do with the job, you know.
Yes, sir.
But time after time after time after time, God has stepped up and said, you know, I know where you are. I know what you need. Let me just tell you one story from this summer. For the last 10, 12 years, we've gotten at least $200,000 a year from a foundation called Deerbrook Charitable Trust. And we knew that sooner or later that would probably dry up. And last year, when our benefactor, a lady on Jupiter Island, got very, very sick, she's very, very old, we were very, very concerned, and she passed. And all of our fears were realized. We got a letter from the foundation that said, your connection to this foundation was through Mrs. Clark. And Mrs. Clark is no longer with us. And since your organization is outside the normal purview of the giving of this foundation, there will not be any future gifts, and you need not make any future requests. Well, boy, that pretty well says it all in a nutshell. You're done. It's over. It's finished. You don't get anything else. Well, $200,000 backed out of our budget. How in the world are we going to replace that? It's enough to make you lose sleep, enough to make your hair turn white, I can tell you that. But you know, this summer, our fiscal year ends June the 30th. The new year begins July the 1st. And this summer, at the end of May, a man came and said, I'll give a matching gift of up to $150,000. I'll match anything up to $150,000. And so we started telling people that. And you know, some of the most amazing things happened. Paul and the quartet went to a little church on the eastern shore of Maryland, or Virginia rather. A little church that has about 25 people, a little church that is not a conservative holiness church. They would be closer to Nazarene in their roots. Some come from other places. Some come from a friend's background. But they found out about Hope Sound, and they like us. And so they had the quartet to come. And they sang, and God helped them. And Paul, in talking about the needs of the service, told what we were up against. And said, so you pray with us, and anyone can help. Anything you can do to help will be greatly appreciated. No big pull, no big push. So they went over to the fellowship hall afterward, and the pastor came up and said, we got a good offering this morning. We got right at $2,000. And with the little crowd that was there, Paul's response was, well, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate it. The good news is 2,000 turns into 4.
Yeah.
The pastor said, well, that's not all of that. He said, I just met with the board before we came over here. And we decided, you know, our church is paid for. And he said, I work at the shipyard, so I don't take a salary from the church. And the funds in our church, we have a lot of people who work at the shipyard there that builds all the ships for the U.S. Navy and so forth. And he said, those are good jobs. And our checking account balance has gone up and up. And he said, we felt like we should help in this. Paul said, well, that's wonderful. So he said, I have a check here for you. And he handed it to Paul with the face up. And Paul looked down, and the check was for $50,000. 25 people in the church. Not even a conservative holiness church. And they just gave us 50, which turns into 100. And we're halfway to having the need met. You know, that's not all. The Lord began to touch people's heart. I was preaching at a camp in Indiana, and the conference president of the group holding that camp got up and said, Hope Sound needs your help. And by the time I was done and walked away from that camp, I had about $10,000, which turns into 20.
Thank the Lord.
And you know what? We just got our auditor's report back. And we had told our auditor last year that we were worried about this. And he came and met with our board of trustees last Thursday morning. And he said, well, you have had a remarkable turnaround. Last year, you were talking about worrying about being $200,000-$300,000 in the red. And he said, this year, you're in the black. You're in the black by over $100,000.
Wow. Thank the Lord.
I nearly fell off my chair. I had all kind of ideas how the Lord could help us. But you know, the Lord, I'm going back to acting like I did when I was a kid. I'm not going to get big ideas. I'm just going to let him do it, because when he just does it, it's always so much neater than when I figure it all out. And it never works like I think it's supposed to work anyway. Now, I still have $200,000 a year for the last 10 years that's going to face me at the end of this year. But you know what? It gives me real good reason to believe that if I can learn the lessons of not building up my expectations and not getting ahead of God and not substituting other rivers and not stopping short before I've done all he tells me to do, my God is big enough to do in the 21st century exactly what needs to be done. Now, I'm talking to you here. And I know I'm not dumb. I know you're disappointed that there aren't more people here. I know that. I know that you've had dreams and hopes and aspirations. But I'm preaching to you tonight to say to you, start looking for God in unexpected places. I think you're doing that some. You never know what will happen with this Spanish ministry. Never know. You haven't started using your drums. I thought when I came in and saw those, I was going to say to you, Brother Johnson, you've come a long way, baby. No, I wasn't. I wasn't going to say that. I had already met your Spanish pastor down there, and as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, the Españito is more exciting than the... We'll have to get the piano player to play faster, you know, and put a little honky-tonk in it every now and then. But you know what? I can't help but believe tonight we've got to go to the right place. We've got to look for the right thing. And then we have to do what God tells us. Do what God tells us. You know, I think in these days that are challenging and I know discouraging and things, I just have to say there's a reason why this church is here. There's a reason why God put it on you guys' heart to come back to this church. And I'm not here to slam bang you around. I'm here to say, let's be looking for what God's looking for. Amen. Let's try to find out what he's doing and get on board with him. Let's forget about the striking our hand over the place and calling on Almighty God of Jehovah of Israel. Let's get beyond all of that and just say, Lord, you speak in any way you want. You do whatever you want to do, but Lord, we're going to be on the lookout. We're going to be on the lookout everywhere we go, every person we meet, every opportunity that affords itself. We're going to be on the lookout to see what God is up to. Here was a guy that, why would God want to heal the fellow who'd been successfully leading attacks on Israel? You know why? Because he made him a convert that was now a servant of the Most High God, a firm believer. He built a little girl's faith. He put a home back together that leprosy had torn apart. And he gave that man a wonderful opportunity to be a powerful witness. You know, I don't know who God's going to bring you across. But I will say this. I think the most important thing in the world we can do is don't look in the wrong place. Go to the right place. Don't live by expectations. Live in submission to God and listen to what He says. And then do exactly what He said. You say, oh, Brother Stetler, that's too simple. That's too simple. Yeah. Most things that God does are simple. He uses the humble things of this world to confound the wise. And I believe with all of my heart tonight, you know, if I was talking to somebody just recently and they said, boy, the headwinds that Christian education faces are scaring me. You listen to Beto O'Rourke and hear him say, if you don't buy into our concept of moralistic right with LGBTQ, whoever else they want to add in there, you won't get a dime of support through anything like Pell Grants. You know what percentage of our budget comes through Pell Grants and other state, local, and national grants? You want to know? $700 and just under $80,000. $780,000. If they said you're going to have to accept gay people, we wouldn't have to spend the night in prayer to ask God if we should do that. It's clear in His Word. We couldn't expect God's smile if we compromised on things that are as important to God as that. He said that's an abomination to Him. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for that. We wouldn't have to stay up half the night praying. But you know what? You take $750,000 out of our budget, we won't be able to function. Bad thing about it is, God's Bible School, Penview Bible College, Union Bible College, Allegheny Wesleyan College, Hope Sound Bible College, every one of them are in the same place. Same place. I looked at our denomination, and about 92% of our pastors and all of our missionaries came through Bible colleges. Yeah, that's incredible. So what are you going to do? Well, we're going to do everything that we feel like God wants us to do. We opened a daycare this year. You say, well, should you be encouraging mothers to put their kids in daycare? Listen, they're going to. They might as well put them in a daycare where we'll teach them about Jesus and teach them to pray over their meals and teach them Christian songs and Christian values. It'll give us a chance to have them come to our school. And we got a full house. And we're looking toward expanding that. We have to make sure we have enough to justify another person but we've got the facilities to expand it. We've got a K-4 program that is right at being maxed out. We're doing everything we can. We're working on online education. And we're set to have doors open to us into places that I got a call from a man the other day, said, I've never heard of the conservative holiness movement, but he said, I felt like a lost soul. He said, I've believed certain things in the Bible, and I got your literature out. And he said, I'm saying, wow, this is just what I believe. And so he said, I'm going to sign up. I'm going to get my ministerial training through your school. He said, I have a passion to work with people from Laos. The Laotian, you remember back in the Vietnam era days, there's the country of Laos. He was in the Vietnam War, and he married a Laotian lady. And he said, we're starting a ministry. I said, you know what? We've got a missions organization here that's interested in that kind of thing. Oh, he said, tell me about it. I don't know what'll happen, but you know what? There's a whole world of people out there that want to they want to take online courses to finish their ed. So we're going to do everything we can to walk through every door God opens for us. And in the meantime, we're going to try to be faithful to His Word and do what He asks us to do. We're not going to cut corners. We're not going to cross bridges. I can't solve that problem any more than the king could heal leprosy. But I know a God who can heal leprosy and solve problems of that kind. This person was talking to me in kind of a despairing way. I said, well, when Hope Sound was started, there was no way in this world. We started in 2 abandoned army barracks. Then they brought a third one. Gave them to us from down at Camp Murphy when it closed, just down the road off of US 1 where Jonathan Dixon State Park is now. And by the time we're done, we got the largest auditorium in the entire county. We got the largest auditorium in the 2 or 3 surrounding counties. In our big tabernacle there, seats 2,500 people. God did that. All that stuff is paid for.
Amen.
It costs us $160,000 a year just to have wind insurance on that place. And that's only one part of the bill. But you know what? Nothing's ever made sense. But neither did healing from leprosy.
Right.
But when you go to the right place, and you do it God's way,
Amen.
and you do what He says, He'll find some way to use you for His glory and do things that you never thought possible. My heart tonight says, these are days of challenge. There's no doubt about it. But these are days to be looking up. These are days to be seeking out what God is wanting to do. Who would ever have thought that the Steve Kearney that used to play and sing here, didn't seem to have any itch to preach, would get called to preach and be serving down there in Colorado Springs? Who would have thought? Never know what God will do.
That's right.
My heart says, let's stay open, let's stay yielded, let's stay obedient, let's keep our eyes on Him, let's do what He says. And if we will, He will.
Amen.
She's heard me say that 1,000 times. That's a simple little thing that guides my life. If we will, He will. Lord, we need You a whole lot worse than You need us. You made worlds. You spun them off Your creative fingertips. You created all that is. All of the chatter and the chaos of this world, all of the communist Chinas and the North Koreas and all of the progressive Democrats and all of the other things that seem so ominous and threatening. Lord, none of those things have caught You off guard. You know where we are. You've got a place for us. We aren't just placeholders. Help us today to hear Your voice, seek in the right place, get the instructions, Lay aside our preconceived ideas and then do exactly what you say. And Lord, when we're finished with that, we'll hear you say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Let me just say this before you leave. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he looked like the epitome of colossal failures. The mocking, jeering mob said, you saved others, save yourself. Come down from the cross, you that healed blind people and raised the dead, save yourself. He looked like a colossal failure, but he was 3 days away from conquering sin and death and hell and the grave because he did his Father's will in his Father's way for his Father's glory. Oh, if we can be like Christ, if we can accomplish God's purpose, we'll never regret it. Never regret it. God bless you. You're dismissed.